Welcome to the Nursing World NCLEX Content Review class. Today we'll be understanding the structure and format of the NCLEX RN examination. We'll be discussing all you would need to know. Okay, so we're going to start with the objectives. Today we want to identify the criteria used by the NCSBN, which is the National Council of State Boards of Nursing, to select questions on the NCLEX examination. We'll also identify ways the NCLEX determines how you pass or how you fail. And again, we'll also identify changes to the NCLEX due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So what are our NCLEX testing objectives? We all know every exam is testing something. So is the NCLEX. What construct is the NCLEX testing? It's actually testing your clinical reasoning and critical thinking. So what is clinical reasoning? What is critical thinking? Let me put it this way. Let's say you are called to a patient's room. A patient relative calls you to the room. You are expected to figure out what is going on with your patient if you step into that room. And you should also be able to decide what you should do about your patient condition. So that figuring behavior, that being able to apply your reasoning, your ability to make safe clinical decisions, that is what clinical reasoning and critical thinking is. So what is the purpose of the NCLEX exam? Well, it's a minimum competency exam. It's not about how smart you are or how you're able to cram contents, but it's about your competency. It measures competency required for an entry-level nurse to practice safely. So that's why as soon as you're able to prove your competency on the exam comes to an end, because that's what it's testing, your ability to practice safely. So what changes to the NCLEX due to the COVID-19? Well, there are some changes you should be aware of. According to the NCSBN, they've done extensive analysis and they found out that these changes does not affect the necessary measurement characteristics. It doesn't affect the difficulty of the examination. It doesn't affect the pass rates or your testing experience. So due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the minimum number of test items would now be 60 and the maximum number of items would be 130. So you would answer between 60 to 130 questions. Before it used to be 75 to 265, of which 15 of them were experimental. We're not sure what happens after the COVID, whether they will revert back to this. Again, the minimum testing time will be 4 hours, no longer 6 hours. And those are next generation NCLEX special research sections will no longer be included in the test. Well, what do these changes mean? Well, the test may have changed in question count, but it's actually still the same test. So you don't need to be scared, you don't need to be worried. 4 hours is still enough time. Even based on the NCSBN data, most candidates take 2 hours and 40 minutes on the exam. So even if you get all of the 130 questions, it still boils down to 2 minutes per question. Again, the computer has always made a decision on the first 60 credited questions. You know, before these changes, of the first 75 questions, 15 were research questions. So by the time the computer was making its decision whether you passed or you failed, it was doing this based on the 60 questions from the 75 you already answered. So most test takers won't be affected by the new 130 question maximum, as the average number of items for the first time test takers is usually 118 questions. So what hasn't changed with the NCLEX? Well, the NCLEX is still a computer adaptive test, or what we call a CAT test, testing your ability to be a safe, competent nurse using all 8 client needs category. The difficulty level and passing standards, they've all actually remained the same. You still get breaks at the 2-hour mark in your exam, and you also get an additional break at the 3.5-hour mark. These are called scheduled breaks. You can either choose to take them or you can choose to decline. You can also take a break whenever you want, but both breaks, I mean the scheduled and the unscheduled breaks, all count as part of that 4-hour maximum time period. So you should be aware of this. So how does the NCLEX determine, or how does a computer make a decision whether you passed or whether you failed? Well, it will make this decision based on one of these 3 rules. There's a 95% confidence interval rule, there's a maximum length exam rule, and there's a root rule. Well, with the 95 confidence interval rule, the computer stops administering exam questions when it has a 95% certainty that your testing pattern will not change. If your testing pattern is clearly above the passing standard, the computer would pass you. If it's below the passing standard or the minimum level of competency, it will fail you. Okay, the second rule, the maximum length exam rule. For the computer to use this rule, it means you have reached the 130th question within the 4-hour time frame. So the computer looks at where the 130th questions lands. That's our last question. It looks at it, where does it land? If it's above the passing standard, it would pass you, whether it's correct or incorrect. Once it's above the line of minimum competency, it will pass you. But if it's below the line of minimum competency, then it's a fail. And the third rule, when you run out of time, here you would have used up the 4-hour and you have not completed the entire 130 questions. So the computer looks at the last 60 questions and they all have to be above the passing standard for you to pass. If it's below, you fail. It's actually a harsh rule, but those are how the NCLEX determines if you pass or fail. So let's look at level of question difficulty. You know, every candidate, regardless of whether they pass or fail, gets half their questions right and half wrong. So for candidates who got 50% right and 50% wrong and still failed, here's how. You know, the NCSBN bases passing and failing on the level of the questions based on Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy is actually a hierarchy. You have to start at the lowest level questions and work your way to the top, which is the most or more difficult questions. Okay, so the basic or the lower level questions, those are the ones, well, categorize them as remembering. You know, this is the lowest level of learning, just like recalling something you read in a textbook. Example, you read orthopnea is a symptom of heart failure. And in the NCLEX, you see orthopnea as an answer choice in a question for symptoms of heart failure, just as you memorized it. Well, these are in the pool of questions you could get on the NCLEX test day, but they are at a non-passing level. You know, these are answers you already memorized, so there's no big deal. You just need to pick it out of what you already memorized. So those are low, non-passing level questions. Then there are the understanding questions. This is the next level. It is the why or pathophysiology question. For example, still on the same, you have a question that says, explain the pathophysiology of orthopnea and why it is a symptom of heart failure. This level of difficulty of question is also in the test pool, but again, they are also at a non-passing level. And then there's the applying and the analyzing questions. So these questions, these are the ones that are at the passing level. For example, you visit a client in the home and the client reports being unable to sleep flat in bed. He has to sleep in a recliner for nights. Which action does the nurse take first? So the nurse has to think, my patient is sleeping in a recliner, he can't sleep flat. My knowledge tells me orthopnea is a symptom of left-sided heart failure. So maybe I need to figure out what's going on with this client's lungs. So you can see the thinking and the figuring and being able to apply this thought process and analyze it also. So those are the higher level questions. Those are above the passing levels. So that's why we say memorizing content, cramming, reading so much content, it does not guarantee you a pass. You must be able to make a judgment about the information. Again, the NCLEX uses computer adaptive testing. So every person will take his or her own exam or his own test, even though the computer is drawing the questions from the same test pool for everyone, but it's still individualized for everybody. So you would answer 60 to 130 questions. Like we said before, it used to be 75 to 265. So like I said, the test is individualized to the ability of every person taking the test. But the computer is calculating your ability level and would give you questions based on your ability level. So everyone is going to find the test challenging because the questions are offered on a level of difficulty such that you have a 50-50 chance to get the answer. So technically, candidates with high ability get few easy questions, whereas candidates with low ability get fewer difficult questions. So the pattern the computer is looking for is for you to get every other questions right and wrong, right and wrong. So at this point, the computer figures your band, it figures your level of competency, it figures your confidence level, knowing that if it gave you a question at a higher level, you will get it wrong. But if it gave you a question at a lower level, you will get it right. So it's able to figure where you are on that line of competency. So let's look at the line of minimum competency. Okay, so you can see on the vertical axis, we see our question difficulty. So there's a number of questions. Okay, here on the horizontal line, we have the number of questions. So this is our number of questions, and this is the question difficulty. So you can see the easier questions at this level, and the more you go higher, the more the questions become more difficult. And this is our line, our passing line, the line of minimum competency. So this is the line we've been referring to all this while. So remember, I spoke about the passing level questions. So passing level questions are questions that fall above this line. So let's assume you started the test on this point and it gave you a question that's on the passing level, okay? If you answer this question correctly, you get one of equal and higher difficulty. So you can see if these students got this right, it gives you one that is on a higher level. Higher is one of equal and higher difficulty, okay? So if you get this right, it gives you another one that is higher. So you can see the level is what? Increasing. The question difficulty is increasing as you get the questions right. Okay. If you fail the question, what happens? So we are here, and then this student fails this question. What happens? The computer will automatically give you a lower and less difficult question. So you can see the question level has dropped. The computer will automatically give you a lower and less difficult question. Okay, but you can look at, if you look at this, you can see between 40 and 60, what happens? He got above the passing line. So you can see all this while, the student has been hovering around the passing line. But at this point, he was going up and down, but their band was above the line of minimum competency. So you can see what happens. He's able to go above the minimum competency, fail, got it right, failed, got another one right, failed, got it right, failed. And then now you can see how far away he is from the passing level. So he's able to put a string of 8 to 10 correct answers together. And that's what took him way, way above the passing level. You know, there are no set points after 60, which is a minimum. So the exam could choose to go off at this point, and this would be a pass. Again, it could go further than this. There's no set point after 60. So automatically, if the exam was to go off at this point, it's well above the passing line, and this would be, the decision would be a pass. But if we had this candidate hovering around this, and you can see he's beginning to go below the passing line. So he's not able to put, there's no string of wrong answers or a string of right answers. And if at 60, the exam goes off, you can see he's below the passing line, and this automatically would be a fail. Again, if you look at this, we agree, okay, the 130 question mark, at no point, you can see he just kept hovering around the passing line. So at no point did he put a string of correct answers together or wrong answers, and he hovered around the line. In this scenario, passing and failing is determined by where the last question is. Is it above the passing line or is it below the passing line? If it's above, if this is your 130th question, this is your 130th question. If your 130th question is above the passing line, then it's a pass. If it's below, it's a fail. So most times I tell people, if the exam refuses to go off and you're at about 120 or 120th question, you need to focus. It probably means you've been hovering around the line and you can still pass. If you fail, then it means you almost passed, really. You almost passed. So decision is made on the last question. Okay, we talked about the route decision. Actually, only about 1.7% of nurses run out of time. It doesn't happen often. So it means they are hovering around the line, and the time they run out of time before they got to the 130th question. So the computer would look at the last 60 questions. So it's going to look at the last 60 questions, and all of them must be above competency to pass. If just one of them is below the line of competency, then the candidate fails. Finally, when does the NCLEX end? Well, when the computer has determined your current ability level. If you answered 60 and above the line, going up and down, it shuts off. If it's above the line, it's a pass. Same way, if you answered 60 and you are below the line and can't get back up, it shuts off. That's a fail. It will also shut off when you have maxed out of your 4 hours. You've used the 4 hours limit of maximum time has been reached, the exam will go off. Again, when a maximum of 130 questions have been answered, the exam would go off.